Hello everybody! I've done some adjustments to the layout for this one, having done the first one last weekend. So you will now see when somebody says something, people's chat coming up, so that the discussion is recorded along with my part as well. I should test that. Let's test that. Hello! There you go. I'm hoping that's visible. Maybe not on a smaller screen. Yeah. Mary's here. Hello. Right. So today we are going to talk through my magnum opus, the Swordmage. Something I've been working on for 5 years, something like that. I've only got an hour and a half, so I ought to crack on really. So, as you can see, Swordmage is in its 29th revision. Or thereabouts, roughly. I haven't been entirely consistent with the versions in the early days, but yeah, I've been working on it for 5 years. So a little bit of history. I first encountered Swordmage almost in the early days of gaining an interest in D&D. So I was introduced to D&D ignoring the cartoon that I watched as a child. I was introduced to D&D at university by one of my housemates who was playing Baldur's Gate. And I watched him play for some time, and I thought, this is something that I want to learn about. More specifically, I wanted to learn about the Forgotten Realms. So I looked up a list of books in the Forgotten Realms. Well, I initially got the D&D rulebooks, and I got the campaign setting for Faerun and what have you. I thought, right, I want to know more lore. So I thought, there are novels on this. Let's see which novels there are and read them all. I discovered there's over 400 novels set in Forgotten Realms, so reading them all was not going to happen. But I discovered that it was created by Ed Greenwood, and he had novels that he'd written about Elminster, his own personal character, and also a very significant character in the Forgotten Realms. So I thought, okay, I'll start with those. And in the second book, he goes to this place that's originally called Coromanthor, which is an elven city, high elven city. It later becomes Mithranor. And in that book, that second book, was my first encounter with what I later established to be a sword mage. And indeed the Moonblades as well. There was a character whose name I cannot remember. Very minor character. It was the uncle and an uncle in a noble family, who was highly respected within this family. And he wielded the noble family's Moonblade. He could do this sort of spellfire thing. It was all very cool, and it was the whole sword and magic thing combined that I fancied. Also, being somebody who my primary introduction to fantasy was through Lord of the Rings, I don't like the idea of wizards just doing magic. Gandalf was very capable with the sword. Okay, he didn't fire spells through the sword. But yeah, I liked that sort of mix. So, apparently the Swordmage was introduced at some point in the 2nd edition. I've yet to find any specific reference to it in 2nd edition, from what I've managed to gather. It did not appear in 3rd edition at all, probably because they couldn't make it work. And then we got to 4th edition, and out came the Forgotten Realms campaign guide in 4th edition. I can't remember exactly what that's called. I think it's the Player's Guide to Faerun or something. And then that was the Swordmage. I'm not going to go into the 4th edition rant. We'll put that one to one side. Other than to say, I thought there are lots of mechanics in 4th edition that were really good. And it's a shame that they brought those forward into 5th edition. But anyway, so we had the Swordmage. Yes, my opinion is opposite to that now. I liked 4th edition. Well, there are aspects of it I liked. There are aspects of it I didn't like. But a lot of it I liked. There's some very good mechanics in that. Very divisive, yes. I think I've talked about it at length elsewhere. Anyway, so we had the Swordmage, and I really liked the idea of it. I've always liked the idea of it. I was very sad that I couldn't convince others to join me in 4th edition games. And then that came and went, and we got 5th edition. And sadly, no Swordmage. And it became apparent a few years in that the Swordmage probably wasn't going to come to 5th edition. Mainly because I've seen lots of Swordmage type things that have been taken out and put into other classes. So you have aspects of it in the Eldritch Knight, in the Fighter subclass. You have the Blade Singer in the Wizards class. There are aspects of bonded weapons and things that you get in the Hexblade, for instance. So, and the cantrips that in 4th edition were predominantly Swordmage cantrips were then given to the wizard when the Sorcerer's Guide for Adventurers came out. So the Forgotten Realms one. Hello, kitten! And so yeah, so I said, well, I really want this class, and there's a gap for it in the way that the classes are set up, so I want to make one. So let's talk about that gap. So I've written it out in great length elsewhere, so I'll have to reproduce in a document somewhere. But the basic idea is that if you consider three levels of magic, you have full caster, half caster, and non-caster. And broadly you've got three kinds of areas as well. So you've got divine, nature, and arcane. Now both Divine and Nature have a sort of half-caster version. So on the Divine side you have the Paladin, on the Nature side you have the Ranger. Yes, there's discussions about the Ranger and how broken it is and what have you. We're not going down that route. Needless to say, doing half-casters are quite difficult. Oh yeah, I've added in follower and emotes, so you're welcome. But there's no arcane half-caster. There kind of is now with the artificer. There kind of is, but that's more technological than it is a sort of combat half-caster. Yeah, I wanted this combat half-caster. So there's that gap there. And there's still a gap despite having other classes. And although they've tried to add melee stuff to the Wizard and the Bladesinger, and they've tried to add magic to Fighter in the Eldritch Knight, there's nothing that actually fills that gap. So that's where it sits. There's a longer discussion there. I will, as I say, I'll write it up and put it somewhere. So what is the overall intent for the class? Well, so it's a half-caster. It should be more or less equally adept at fighting without magic as with magic. Although it will be significantly weaker without, as you'll see later, but it should, at least if you're fighting in a non-magic zone, it's not useless as a wizard would be. So yeah, half-caster, at 5th level get an extra attack. Those are the basic ones. I wanted to do a sort of new version of spells where the magic comes as part of the attack, as that was integral with the 4th edition class. So you attack somebody with your sword, either throwing it or melee, and the magic comes as part of that. Or it's all linked. It's not, oh, I'm a fighter, but I can also do magic separately. The two are combined. So I've realised fairly early on, okay, I'm going to have to do its own spell list. Which is fair enough. A lot of them imported straight from 4th edition, with adjustments to make them work in 5th. And I've still got a lot more spells that I need to port over. I cherry-picked the ones that I liked most to change first. Oh, and the other thing is teleportation. So sword mages are known for their teleportation. In 4th edition, half the spells had some kind of teleportation element. You had the ability to teleport as a movement action. It was that was what offset the fact that it was melee only. You were a very mobile class, move around the battlefield very easily. So I wanted to do something there. I wanted something more than just Misty Step. I tried it with Misty Step initially, and realised that I needed something more. So we'll get on to that a bit later. What was I going to say? Yeah. Okay, the other thing with a lot of the spells being ported and everything, that's one of the primary reasons I decided that I'm never going to write this up to a point where it's going to go on DM's Guild or anything. Because most of it having been in 4th edition, I don't have the rights to release it, publish it as a 5th edition version. So that's always going to be a limit. I had to rename everything and make sure that the mechanics are sufficiently different and everything. And it would be a nose and not worth doing. So yes, the teleportation focus, I wanted it to level broadly equivalent to the points at which a full caster would access teleportation. So it has to be one of the most capable classes at teleporting, because that's part of the point of the class, which causes its own problems. Because you've got to set up a way of having them cost resources, but in a way that makes sense and doesn't contradict what exists already. And so, as you'll discover in a minute, I decided to go with spell points rather than spell slots, because that's the only way I could work it so that you have that single resource pool between spells and other abilities, which is very important. So yes, that's the disclaimer here. Going back to the not going to publish anyway. This is primarily for me, for me to have a class that I'm going to enjoy playing. Doesn't have to be super balanced. In fact, if you look at all the classes, all of them are broken to some extent. Nothing is actually balanced in D&D. But it needs to be good enough that I say to a potential GM, hey, I'd like to play this class, and they don't immediately look at it and go, well, that's overpowered, that's overpowered, that's overpowered. You're always going to get that to a certain extent. Every class has certain abilities that, taken in isolation, can be considered overpowered. You've got to look at it as a whole and go, right, well, if you put in context those abilities versus what it can and can't do, what flaws the class are, is it then more balanced? We had other complications that I will talk through as we get there. Ideas for next version, that's just notes for me, what I still need to do on it. Right. Gather away for 15 minutes before I've even started. At least it's not as bad as my Dragon Blade where I was nattering for an hour. So, let's work through the class features. Hit dice, 1d8. Seems reasonable, not too tanky, not too squishy. And it's equivalent to where it's supposed to be. Light armor. So again, it's similar to the traditional idea with magic. I know this no longer exists in 5th edition, but the traditional idea with magic was that if you wear medium or heavy armor, you're not going to be able to cast very well. With this, you need light armor, at least, otherwise it's not going to work. But keeping it light armor rather than going to medium later on sets up a nice balancing factor when you get to the ward, which I will talk about. Weapons, I've just listed bladed weapons. Spear is a bit of an odd one. I might change how I describe that. But it's supposed to be a sword. Some kind of sword. I tend to use longsword. Saving throws, constitution and intelligence. So intelligence being the primary stat for the class. Constitution relates to, because you're going to be casting magic whilst in melee. Concentration checks are constitution based, so hence that. These skills I think I basically just stole from other places. I don't think I had any argument for defining that. Equipment, again, I think this is stolen almost directly from 4th edition. Then we get on to the table. I will be working through the abilities individually later. So, broadly, the table matches up with that of the Paladin. So, Paladin being the main sort of other half-caster. Initially I looked at it as being a sort of arcane paladin, but it sort of moved on from that point. But I use the paladin as a reference for the table. So you get the subclass features broadly the same point that the paladin would. Arcane techniques is something I'll talk about in a minute, but it's kind of equivalent to cantrips. Kind of. The progression in terms of the numbers known is the same as cantrips. Mage point is max spell level. If you go with the official rules for the official variant rules in DMG for doing spell points, these are the numbers you get for a half-caster. Except you don't get casting ability at first level. So let's start through it. So the first thing you get is a sword bond. And it's similar in the way it works to the Hexblade. I think the Warlock Hexblade, and I think the Pact of the Blade as well. You bond to a weapon that allows you to use your spellcasting stat rather than your strength or dex with your melee fighting. It allows you to summon your weapon from across that plane. If the weapon breaks, you can reforge it from one of its shards. Oh, and you can't be disarmed. Simple. Fairly straightforward. Existing equivalents. Then we get one of the major features of Swordmage is an arcane ward. So this is what I was saying about with the light armor. So this will give you a minimum of a +1 bonus to AC. and it sets up an offset between the damage you can do, between attack and defense. So the damage you can do versus the damage you can absorb. So if you're wielding a two-handed weapon or a weapon and a shield, your ward will only give you a +1 bonus to AC. If you're carrying a shield, you get a +2 from that, so you get a +3 overall anyway. But if you're carrying a two-handed weapon, which the class initially doesn't allow you, but one of the subclasses will. We'll get on to that. Yeah, if you're wielding a two-handed weapon, you get extra damage, but you lose your additional defense to do so. So that sets up that, there's a word I'm looking for that I can't remember. Competition. It's not the right word. You know what I mean. The other interesting thing about the ward is, unlike wearing armor, if you get knocked unconscious, the ward disappears. Even if you're revived, you don't get it back until you've taken a short rest. And so you then got an aim as a sword mage to not fall unconscious, because you then become substantially weaker. So that's an interesting idea, but also part of the sword mage, as we'll come to later, idea is to be a little bit tanky. In the 4th edition idea, it's a defender. It's supposed to help basically just tank attacks away from your allies. So you're trying to absorb damage, but at the same time you can't fall unconscious because you're then substantially weaker. And then a couple of benefits that you get first level that sort of work with the lore of the sword mage. You add your intelligence modifier to your initiative rolls. The idea with the sword mage is that it gets into combat quickly. And although I haven't had a chance to use it with Archimedes yet, in terms of taking advantage of being near the top of the initiative order, it's if you're in a situation where you're diving into combat and you want to act fast, you get that little boost to initiative. It's not hugely unbalancing either, because you only roll initiative once, and after the first round it makes no difference. And then you've got the advantage on constitution saving throws to maintain your concentration on a spell. That makes sense. If you're continually fighting in melee, you're going to get hit lots. You're a class that you're expecting to get hit lots, so it makes sense that you would train to maintain concentration. Then you have the standard spellcasting gump. It's pretty standard text, almost cut and paste. And then you got the mage point cost, or the spell point cost, which is just standard, lifted from the rules and DMG. Spellcasting ability is intelligence, so it's a standard arcane spellcaster. You study through text and through practice, and that's how you gain your arcane ability. Intelligence therefore makes sense. Save DC, attack modifier, usual. Gumph, Spellcasting focus. You will use your bonded weapon as spellcasting focus. As makes sense. That means, and I've had arguments with other people on this a few times, if you have a +1 weapon, +2 weapon, what have you, you get that magic bonus to your spell attacks and damage. That's the rules. And then you've got the standard... What? Yes, that is the rules. And then you've got your standard, you learn 2 spells on level up. Oh, I should mention, I suppose, with preparing spells, you've got to prepare spells from your spellbook. There's no ritual spell casting for the Swordmage. I did toy with it, but that would be it decided it would be unnecessary. Right, then we get to arcane techniques, and this has changed several times in the various versions that I've done. Initially, it was supposed to be equivalent to cantrips, but I wanted cantrips that would act across 2 attacks. So any other sort of spell casting class, if you have cantrips, you tend not to have 2 attacks. There are exceptions to that, but that's the general rule. Because if you're casting cantrip, you're then not using you're then not using any extra attacks. And a cantrip would increase in damage with the levels. So as the extra attacks would. So there's no point actually having both. You have one or the other. Because if you have both, you can't benefit from both. It then becomes a waste of an ability. So I was thinking in terms of if you have both, why would you use attacks over cantrips? Because cantrips scale. And I wanted the extra attack almost primarily in that context, in terms of I've put an awful lot of effort into looking it up, Essa, because I've had this argument too many times. I lost my train of thought now. Yeah, so if you had cantrips, you'd only really end up using your extra attack in a scenario where there's no magic. So it seems a bit pointless. So I wanted a way to split out that sort of extra magical aspect to attacks. So the first thing I did was take the classic sort of Swordmage cantrips and go, well, rather than them being oh, by the way, those are Green Flame Blade, Booming Blade, Sword Burst, and Lightning Lure. So they're all sort of sword based cantrips, and they were all originally written for the Swordmage. I can post all my sources for my reasoning. Yes, absolutely, yes. And yeah, that ended up not working. Because you ended up doing extra damage on every attack for free, and that kind of didn't work. So we had to think of a different route, and eventually I settled on this idea of arcane techniques, which act similarly to the sort of Paladin Divine Smite, or the sort of sneak attack idea, or things. So you make an attack. If you hit, you can then spend resource to do extra things. And in order to not let it get too powerful, I've limited it by number of points that you can spend in any one go. You can see my mouse there, can't you? Yes. Because for the Paladin, it's limited by the level of the spell slots that you can spend. When you change that to spell points, you just have a massive pool. So you can't just say, yeah, you can do that up to any limit, because that would be stupid. So I've roughly kept it down to it's roughly equivalent to the spell points. It's not exactly. That you can do at the various levels. And then what I've done is you've got 5 main elements, and you learn a block of elements in the same way that you learn cantrips. So you start off with, you start off with 2, and then you get 3, and then 4 elements, right? Now each element has 2 or 3 abilities, all of which cost. And the limiting factor there is that you have to prepare 1. And you can only use that 1 unless you take time during, say, a short rest to switch elements. So you can only use the abilities from that 1 element at any one time. So, for instance, Archimedes, my Swordmage, has started off with fire and cold. I've only ever used fire at this point because that's in theme for the character, but he also has access to cold if he knows that he's going into an area where fire is likely to be a liability. And I tried to vary these across the various elements so that they're not all just, oh, it's all the same thing, just you do a different element damage type, because that would be dumb. But all of them have what I call an elemental attack, which is the Divine Smite equivalent. You attack, you hit, you spend points, and you do extra elemental damage to that target. So all of them have some variation of that. And then you've got additional abilities. I think they all have an ability that does stuff to a secondary target. And that's kind of equivalent to the Green Flame Blade idea. So you hit one target and do damage, and then you spend however many points to also damage target next to it with that element, whether that's acid, cold, whatever. And then there are other ones that will sort of apply a disadvantage. So here we've got an acid which will apply this one will give you advantage on the next attack roll made against the target. You've got this that will cause the target to have disadvantage on their next attack roll. There isn't one for fire. Fire is a bit special, which I'll tell you in a moment. You've got a blinding strike here for lightning, so it's blinded for a turn, or deafened for the sonic one. So you got those sort of aspects. Fire is a bit special. It is the only one where the elemental attack can do substantially more damage. So the other elemental attacks are limited by either 2d6, 2d8. Lightning's a bit weird. Thunder is 2d6. The fire, if you put in more points, just like with the Divine Smite, you can do more fire damage. So eventually up to, I think, 66. Yeah, 66 fire damage, ultimately. I'll have to look it up again, Essa. I did find it somewhere. I'm not going to sit here on stream and look up a load of rules just to support an argument. Right, and so those arcane techniques are your main new ability at level 2. So that's kind of cool. The main limitation there is it uses mage points, and at level 2 you only have 4. So you can do it basically twice. And because the mage points are also your spellcasting points, that then limits your ability to cast spells. So again, with Archimedes, in our campaign, I used all my spell points at level 2 in the first encounter, and then we did another 4 encounters that day. So yeah, I spent 4 encounters having no magic. But it also demonstrated that he was reasonably capable at that level without magic. 3rd level is the cool, you get a subclass level. So you get the Swordmage Aegis, which I will talk about once we've gone through the rest of these abilities. Your Swordmage subclass. And you also get the ability to teleport. So teleport, it's bonus action, much like Misty Step. Simple 30 feet, except you can spend additional mage points and go an extra 30 feet. Did I teleport yesterday? No, I did not. It occurred to me when we finished the session that actually I hadn't done the teleportation. And I really should have tried that out. So again, it uses your your very small resource pool to start with. But when you get to the higher ends, that ends up being you just get to bounce around the battlefield. That's very cool. And there's also an extension ability that any teleportation you do, whether it's using this ability or as part of a spell, because there's a number of spells, that have teleportation, you can spend a point to take somebody else with you. So that's kind of cool. So you get a little bit of extra mobility. Did I leave it at 2? So I did reduce it. It was originally 3 points to cast, which is the equivalent of a level 2 spell, plus an extra 2 points for each 30-foot increment. So I've reduced it to 2 points to cast and 1 point for each additional increment. Yeah. So it's roughly half the cost that it was before. So the difficulty we found with that was, originally I said, well, it's a second level spell, Misty Step, so it should cost a second level spell, 3 points. But I'm not a full caster, I'm a half caster. So 3 points for me is double the equivalent cost if I were a wizard at that level. And we went, well, since teleportation is supposed to be much easier for Swordmage, let's reduce the cost. So that's what I did. I think it should be more than 1 mage point for the initial step. That does therefore mean at the lower levels there's a limit to how many times I can do it, and that limit is pretty small. But it occurred to me, thinking about it later on, that actually this class is quite front loaded, so you get a lot of abilities fairly early on. At the higher ends, there's not much in terms of additional abilities. Not much. Well, they don't add much. So you get your bulk of your abilities early on. So restricting those abilities, because you've got a very small resource pool, actually works as a counterpoint very well. Class is still capable, and I've been showing that in my games. So it's not limiting, or it's not unfairly limiting. And I think it's a fairly good balancing aspect. Ability score improvements, it's the bog standard. Not much to say about that. At 5th level, you get an extra attack. Again, bog standard. Mental defense. So this mental defense, not only does it make sense, but also it's one of the things that I put in for a metagaming reason, and that was I got so fed up with being charmed or frightened as part of mechanisms in the game that basically denied me the ability to take a turn. That I was going to put in something in my class that countered that. Originally it was immunity to these at 6th level, but I realised that that's probably a bit high. And I basically tied it to the ward and said, okay, whilst your ward is up, you have advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. And again, that then means if you get knocked unconscious and you lose your ward, you're then a lot more vulnerable. It makes sense from a class point of view, because this is a class where you're trained for combat, both in a martial sense and in a magic sense. It makes sense that you would be trained to protect your brain, both psychologically and also magically, from being attacked. At 8th level, I went, okay, you've got to be able to teleport further. For the cost of the ability. So now, whenever you use your ability, you can teleport up to 60 feet initially, plus increments if you pay for it. Now initially it was you could teleport to where you could see. At about that level in terms of the teleportation progression for a wizard, you get access to Dimension Door, which is where this comes in. Dimension Door is up to 500 feet. You can do it in any direction, and you don't have to be able to see where you're going. You can just do it, and if you can't get there, you take damage. So, yeah, I've added that in. You can now go wherever you want. 4 mage points was the rough amount that seemed about right. So if you want to go anywhere up to 500 feet, rather than going with the base ability, which at this point is 60 feet, and adding additional increments, once you get to 4, you can go, right, now we're going up to 500 feet. And then you can increment after that if you so wish. And then you've got this ability that says, well, okay, now you can take any number of allies with you, but you had to pay for each one. Pay points for each one. Essa and I had a discussion as to how many allies this would be, because if you're not talking about grid, any allies that you can fit within 5 feet can be a large number. I might actually put a limit to 8, but just to clarify it for technical purposes, but there's going to be very few instances where it will matter. And then we get to the later levels, and I go, okay, should I give access to my class the ability to teleport long distance? Because those are then sort of the high level spells that a half-caster normally wouldn't get access to. And I ummed and ahed about it, and I thought, actually, yes, I should. Because we're progressing the teleportation at the same rate as the full caster. So it should get access to those. And also, as a teleportation specialist, that makes sense. So the next question comes, so how do you do it? At the point that you get to these levels, the higher level spells get quite expensive. And also when you're doing it with points end up, a points pool ends up being very flexible versus spell slots, because you can pool up your lower level points it's equivalent to pulling up your lower level slots to make a higher level one. So it ends up being more powerful than using slots. So, okay, how do I limit that? I don't want to have the ability to teleport long range just willy-nilly. So I originally did it, well, you can do this X number of times according to the table, and that seemed a bit it seemed like an awkward way of doing it. And then I found the Warlock and their Mystic Arcanum ability. So a Warlock can only cast spells up to 5th level, but they don't get this Mystic Arcanum ability for the later abilities. Okay, thanks Essa. Take care. You've got the Mystic Arcanum abilities that says, okay, at this level, you get a 6th level spell. At this level, you have a 7th level spell, 8th level, 9th level, etc. Right? And that's how they get the higher level spells for that class. I thought that's actually quite a nice way of doing it. And it's also the ability to cast it without spell slots. So I went, okay, let's do, at 10th level, you get the ability to do Teleportation Circle. But you can only do it once. But it doesn't cost you anything. Any mage points. So you gain the ability to do it just once per long rest. We'll have to see once I get there whether her long rest is enough or too much limitation. I might have to reduce it to short rest for it to hit. So we'll see. And then I did the improvement to the mental defense. So I wanted to at some point get to the point where we're immune to charm and frightened condition, right? And again, I'm tying it to the ward. So while your ward is active, you are immune to charm and frightened. I also put in you gain resistance to psychic damage, and I'm blaming Critical Role for that one because that's one of the interesting things. Until they started introducing psionic classes into D&D, or reintroducing psionic classes, no class has resistance against psychic damage. And again, it made sense in this context that you should have resistance against psychic damage. Because you've got a more fortified brain against those sort of things. And then it's reduced back to the previous state when your ward drops. So that's the lowest level is at that point, is that you get advantage on saving throws. 11th level, basically just stolen from the paladin. This is the balancing element that makes the 2 attacks balance with a leveling cantrip once you get to the higher levels. So 11th level, every attack you do does an extra 1d8 damage. What I've done is I've done it by your selected element type. So it's based on the element type of your arcane technique that you prepared. So if you're going with fire, this will be fire. And yeah, So it's just for balance, basically. But it also adds the nice flavour of, at this point, you're now finally at the point where by default you are adding elemental damage as part of your attack. There's also the scope by selecting the element type that if you happen to pick the wrong element type, your power level's reduced. And that's your pros and cons, right? Rather than just going, you do extra damage. So I put lots of little things like that just to subtly reduce the power level of this class overall. So that you don't get to a point where you're insanely overpowered. And then the rest of the abilities are teleportation. So at 14th level, you get to cast teleport once without expending range points. Simple. You can do your 7th level spell, teleport. There you go. You can teleport the party. It makes sense. Okay, yeah, at that point a wizard can do it more often, but it's part of their spell slots. So if they want to use those spell slots for other spells, they can. This, you can do it once regardless. And then 20th level, I left that with the description of super duper ability thing. Because I couldn't think what to make it. And I was sort of going back and forth again. I really just want to give this class at 20th level a free 30-foot teleportation every turn. And it's 20th level. At that point, you sort of go, clerics get a guaranteed divine intervention, 20th level. There are all sorts of insane abilities that happen at 20th level. So why not? The game is pretty much broken at that point anyway, you know? Just do it. And also I've given them access to... Oh, that's the Step Mastery. Yeah, that was that. I'm talking about these the wrong way around. And then you got plane and travel. I went, okay, what's the ultimate in teleportation? The 9th level spell, Gate. Between planes. Yeah, you can do that once. There you go. So that is your base abilities. It's predominantly teleportation, and then you've got the arcane ability and techniques, and that sort of elemental damage aspect. So it's teleportation and elemental damage in a nutshell. Which I think works for a class. It's got that. Then you got the Aegises. So these Aegises, whatever. Nominally there are 3 of them. The third one I've not even started work on. And in fact the only one that's properly fleshed out is the Aegis of Shielding, because that's what Archimedes is. The Aegis of Assault, I know what should go in there, but yeah, I just need to fill it out. So broadly, your 3 classes there in 4th edition, they were defined by your at-will abilities. There are no further developments further down, apart from the fact that your spells you could adapt your spells based on which class you had. So it was the three marks that define the difference between subclasses in 4th edition. The broad theme is the Aegis of Assault is more attacking. So your main mark ability is, okay, let's explain the marks. So the initial marks, you get to mark a creature, one creature, and each round you can use your reaction in response to something that that creature does, and that distinguishes primarily the 3 classes. The mark of the Aegis of Assault, your mark allows you to use your reaction to teleport to that creature and get a free attack. Welcome back, Mary. Yeah, so you get to teleport to that creature and get a free attack. Thank you for the follow, Failure. Welcome. The Aegis of Shielding is your tank. Their reaction says, I am going to reduce the damage that you do to my allies to encourage you to attack me instead of them. So it's a very much a defensive support subclass, and it's designed for that purpose. And you got the Aegis of Ensnaring, which is kind of more trap based in the original form, and the reaction was, unlike with the mark of Assault, where you're teleporting to the creature, with the mark of Ensnaring you teleport the creature to you. So that's the main difference. No, Failure, this was made by me. This is my homebrew, based on, inspired by, because I've done a lot of work to it, but inspired by the 4th edition class. And the Ensnaring Swordmage also included enhancements to their spells that laid sort of magical traps and that sort of thing. But again, I've not worked on that. Primarily, I'm interested in playing the Aegis of Shielding, because that's what my character is. Yeah, so that's the one that's most fleshed out. The other thing with the Aegis of Assault is that it's the only subclass that has access to 2-handed weapons. So it's more attacky and they can do more damage. Not substantially more, but more. So also I need to write lore in there. They do have lore in the books. I was going to write my own. There you go. So at 3rd level, each subclass has 2 abilities, as do most subclasses. In D&D. So for Assault, it's you get 2-handed proficiencies and your mark of Assault, which I've just explained. For the Aegis Shielding, you get, it's equivalent to taking the Tough Feat, kind of. So you get temporary hit points. When you finish a long rest, you get temporary hit points equal to twice your level plus your Constitution modifier. So you can substantially increase the amount of damage you can take to become more tanky. Which means at 3rd level, Archimedes has 39 hit points, which is not bad for something with a D8 hit point count. Okay, his constitution is quite high. But yeah, he has 30 hit points plus 9 temporary hit points, so he can take a lot of damage. And the mark of shielding is you use your reaction to do damage reduction. So this has changed a few times, but I got to the point now where it's a D4 plus your proficiency plus your constitution, and that D4 increases over time. But also you can reduce damage to a number of creatures up to your proficiency bonus. So at the lower levels that's 2, eventually you'll get up to 6. So long as you are not being targeted, that's the important thing. And the idea being that you're encouraging this creature to target you. So, and what I wanted was at the higher level to sort of go, okay, we're fighting a dragon. I'm behind it, the rest of my party are in front of it. It fires off its breath weapon. I've marked it, so I'm going, okay, I'm going to reduce the damage it does to 6 of my allies by, say at 15th level, 1d10 plus, I think proficiency at that is 5, plus constitution modifier, which I think is 3. So 18 points. That could negate all the damage, potentially. That's going to be very frustrating for this dragon. And the dragon's going, okay, right, I'm going to attack you now instead. Which is the point of the class. Originally in 4th edition, all of these, all of the Swordmage, as part of the mark, had this ability where you go, if that creature is marked, they have disadvantage on all attacks they make that don't include you as a target. And the way that 4th edition worked, that included saves as well. So in 5th edition terms, that would mean all your allies would get advantage on saves. Now, that kind of works as intended if I were to do that. And go, well, and I think I do later on. No, I don't do that later on. I took it out completely. It kind of makes sense. So if that creature is targeting you, that mark has no impact that way. Because the intention of the mark is to go, you will target me. It's like there's a first level spell, Compelled Duel, that does a similar sort of thing. The problem is that in 5th edition, because it's not built in to work that way, in 4th edition, that concept of that kind of mark existed across all the defender roles in 4th edition. It was built in as part of the rule set. In 5th edition, it's not. So when you include something like that in 5th edition, it feels overpowered, even though it really shouldn't be. So yeah, ultimately I had to take it out, which was a shame. But there you go. So in order to counter that for this mark of shielding, I've said, okay, I can reduce the damage to a number of to a number of allies, as long as you're not targeting me, to try and achieve the same effect, but in a way that works in 5th edition. Anyway, at 7th level, so the second ability, you get auras. The Assault Aura I've not really fleshed out, but it's kind of a bless type ability. So if you start within the aura, you get a D4 that you can use once that turn. I need to play with that. There's something similar in one of the cleric classes. That's where I got that from. But it sort of works. I need to play test it, see if it actually works, whether it's balanced, but I'm not playing that. More of interest to me is shielding, which is so we've got this mark of elemental resistance. So basically, whilst your ward is active, and again, this is tied to the ward, so try and keep it all linked. While the ward is active, you have this aura, and this is elemental resistance. So you select one element type. It doesn't have to be the same as your arcane techniques. One element type that you are resistant to whilst your ward is active. I've allowed you to change it more on the fly so that it's not too restricting. If you go, right, we're suddenly about to attack a white dragon. Okay, give me a minute and I will switch my resistance. Rather than go, okay, we're going to have sleep first. So, yeah, you either do it long rest, or you basically spend a first level spell slot. So yeah, it's resistant to within 10 feet of you. And both auras extend out to 30 feet at 18th level. At 11th level, you got what I think is one of the coolest abilities. You can only use it once per short rest, but it's very cool. And it's basically, if you make an attack and you miss, if you make a spell attack and you miss, you can then, rather than losing those spell points, you can reuse them immediately. Because there's nothing more frustrating than having a 5th level spell, highest level spell, that's dependent on a single sword attack, miss the attack and go, well, you've lost that spell slot now. I know there's a lot of spells like that, but it's at that level, it's more a case of doing saves and half damage if you fail saves, or succeed on saves. So to then lose a 5th level spell completely, that becomes a bit disappointing, really, very frustrating, particularly since it's your main thing to do that turn, and if it happens time after time. So this is something that allows you to offset that slightly. So for the assault, because it's more aggressive, that's an attack response. So it goes, you can use the energy that you had in that attack but missed with to blast out. It's basically equivalent to a thunder wave, roughly. Except there's no pushing, you just get thunder damage, and that damage increases based on the level of the spell cast. So if it's a 1st level spell, you do 1d6 damage, but if it was originally a 5th level spell, you miss and you fire this off, that's then 5d6 damage, thunder damage, to any hostile creature in a 15-foot cone. For free. Well, not for free. You kind of. So you recovered a spell there. For the shielding Swordmage, at that point you get to convert those spell points into temporary hit points. I initially contemplated healing, but I thought temporary hit points more applicable, because, or it's more balancing because temporary hit points don't stack. So it's not necessarily the same effect, but also it counters things that reduce your standard hit points. For instance, if you have something like Chilled Touch that prevents you from healing, you can still get temporary hit points. And the last thing, I need to modify these enhanced mark things at level 15. But as it stands at the moment, originally you can only mark one creature per short rest. Once you get to 15th level, and this is the same with the Hexblade's Curse in Warlock, you can then transfer that to another creature once you've killed them, or what have you. Again, I wanted, originally you had the ability to cast the mark once a turn, and if you cast a new one it would remove the old one. So it gives you more flexibility. I still don't know how balanced it is. I may go back to that. It needs testing. So those are the subclasses. And then we're on to spells. So I created a spell list, and I realised when I started reworking the spells that actually there are a lot of analogies already existing in 5th edition in the actual spell lists. So rather than rewrite them, just go, well, this 4th edition spell is equivalent to this 5th edition spell. So you just have access to that 5th edition spell. So that's kind of where this spell list works. I've also sort of run through the list of spells and go, well, that seems appropriate, that seems appropriate, that seems appropriate. So that's where these come from. I haven't restricted it to any particular source class. So some of these are wizard spell lists, some from the warlock spell lists, some from divine caster spell lists. It's just I looked through them and looked at what makes sense. But there are other spells that then were originally written for 4th edition that it makes sense just to rewrite them in the form of 5th edition. I've done the first level spells thoroughly. Above that, kind of, but not so much. They probably need reworking. So I'm just going to go through the first level spells that I've done already, and then we'll probably finish there. So you got this one, the Burning Blade. It adds the flaming effect to your blade that stays for a minute. Concentration. You do extra fire damage when you hit something. Basically. because this was not designed to work with arcane techniques, I kind of included in the arcane techniques, okay, these don't stack. So you either get the damage from the arcane techniques or you get it from here, but not both. So I probably need to rework that a little bit. Then you have this dazing rebuke. So when a creature you see within 30 feet of you hits or attacks an ally, right? In 4th edition, you have this thing called Daze, or a condition called Daze, which is effectively equivalent to what the slow spell does. So rather than invent a Daze condition, I just went, okay, this is the first level spell. I think it only affects for a single turn. So it's a 1 creature, 1 turn effect that has the effect of the slow spell, which is a 1 minute effect that affects up to 60 creatures. So yeah, it's a first level version of the slow spell that's done on the reaction. Now this is the thing that I was talking about earlier. So in 4th edition, you had these little extra abilities that depended on your subclass. So if I had the Aegis of Shielding subclass, I could add to this and go, okay, your affected target now also has disadvantage on all attack rolls until the next turn. And these were defined in the spells in 4th edition. So I've just copied those across. I may have to remove them. They're not really 5th edition style. It does the higher level thing instead. So maybe I'll take them out, but I'm not sure. I need to discuss that one. Electrified Lash is a simple area of effect thing. Any hostile creature within 10 foot makes a saving throw or gets lightninged. Simple. The other thing that comes up later on, in 4th edition there were lingering effects. So you'd have effects that would do ongoing damage until the creature saved. Doesn't really happen in 5th edition, so I've had to convert some of those to other ways of doing things, either by saving throw, either by concentration or some of the means. I was reminded of that because it was an electric, a lightning effect, but it's one of the higher level spells. Frost Backlash. If you're damaged by a creature within 5 feet of you, basically you do a bunch of cold damage to them when they hit you. And that increases depending on what level you use. Nice and simple. Host of Shields. You have floating shields around you. Gives you +2 to AC and advantage on dexterity for the next 10 minutes. It was originally a minute, but I upped it to 10 minutes because I compared it to some existing spells that basically said actually it should be 10 minutes. But it's concentration. So. Mithril recovery. This is actually more of a waste than I originally thought when I first looked at it. But it basically says if you've got an effect that you can end with a saving throw, you can use your bonus action to make an additional saving throw. But you may find that you make a saving throw in your bonus action when you could have made your saving throw at the end of your turn and succeeded anyway. So it just gives you one extra chance. I suppose you could use your bonus action at the start of your turn. And if you make your saving throw, you then get your action. I don't know. So it might have some benefit. Ward of Brilliance. This is actually very similar to, I think, one of the other shield spells, but subtly different. So it gives you +5 to AC against the triggering attack. I think the shield gives you +5, but also protects you from magic missile. This gives you +5, and if it fails, it blinds the triggering creature, which is kind of cool, to be honest. Again, it's reaction. And then you got Whirling Blade, which is also a cool spell. So you use a first level spell, throw your sword at a target within 30 feet. You're basically guiding this sword whirling through the air. If you hit that first target, you've achieved a hit, it does a little extra damage and your sword comes back to you. If you miss it, however, you get a second opportunity with a second target. It's 30 feet from the first. If you hit, it comes back to you. If you don't, you get a third chance. Same, if you miss that, you get a fourth chance. So the chances are that at some point in one of those four, you'll hit something. And then if you don't, your sword just comes back. It's quite a cool way of using magic to give you extra chances to hit something. Because the likelihood of missing 4 times in a row is pretty slim. So yeah. Anyway. That is the Swordmage. I hope you guys found that interesting. I was hoping to try and sort of explain some of the background behind it and the reason I did things certain ways. Some of my thinking behind it. So I hope you all found that useful. And yeah, I'm gonna have to leave it there because I've got another game soon anyway. And yeah. So I thank you all for coming along. And if you want to watch me play Sea of Thieves, I will be back at 8 PM this evening, which is in 5 hours. So please do. Other than that, thank you. Take care.